On the 21st cassette of this Bible study series, Dr. Howard C. Estep, president of World Prophetic Ministry Incorporated, will continue his verse-by-verse exploration of the book of Genesis. We joined the Friday night Bible study audience in the King is Coming Auditorium at Colton, California, where Dr. Estep is now beginning his lesson with Genesis chapter 44.
We have a lesson outline for you. It's divided into three parts. One, their feigned dismissal. Now that's a sham. It's an imitation. It's not the real thing. Their feigned dismissal. That's chapter 44, verses 1 through 13. Number 2, explanation to Joseph, verses 14 through 17. And lastly, number 3, Judah's heartbreaking plea. This is verses 18 through 34. So we're ready to begin our lesson, a verse-by-verse study of the book of Genesis, every Friday night in the King is Coming Auditorium. This is what we do. Anytime you're passing through Southern California and you wonder what to do on Friday night, you merely come to Colton, come to the King is Coming Auditorium, and we'll be there with a verse-by-verse study of the Bible. All right, we're ready to begin. Genesis chapter 44, our first part, their feigned sham dismissal. Verses 1 through 13. Verse 1 says, and he, this is Joseph, and he, Joseph, commanded the steward of his house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry. In other words, they're ready now to go back up into Canaan. This is their second trip down into Egypt to get corn and other grain and such. So now he's saying to the man of his house, the steward of his house, you take these men, fill their sacks as full as you possibly can, as much as they can carry. And you'll notice what it says in the latter part of verse 1, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. So Joseph is going to play a trick on them again. The money that they're supposed to have paid for the corn, he's going to have the man of his house put that money back in the mouth of the sack. It's rather interesting. Verse 2, and put my cup. Now this is a special cup. This is a special cup that a very important person in Egypt possessed. It was part of the worship service of the Egyptians. And Joseph evidently had fallen into some of the routine of the Egyptian way of life. So he says, and put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his corn money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. So here we're going to have Joseph using a new strategy to humble his brethren before revealing himself. He's going to further test them, because I don't think he's fully satisfied that they are genuine in their love for their father, love for their other brothers. So now he's going to put them to a supreme test. So he's going to have his special cup put in the sack of the youngest brother, and their corn money also is going to put in there. Verse 3, and as soon as the morning was light, soon as daybreak, the men were sent away. They started on their journey back up to Canaan, they and their beasts of burden. So all of their animals loaded with these sacks. I can see them as they go in 1, 2, 3 order, winding on their way back up to Canaan. It's rather interesting. They're going early in the morning to beat the heat of the desert. Verse 4, and when they were gone out of the city, as soon as they got out of the city limits, and not yet far off, not too far out, Joseph said unto his steward, up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? When you overtake this small caravan of donkeys, and I don't think they had any camels, they might have had, I don't think so, but I believe they had these small donkeys, beasts of burden, And Joseph says, when you overtake this small caravan, you say to them, wherefore have you rewarded evil for good? In other words, you were in my master's house and he did good to you, and he sold you corn. Now why have you done evil to him? That's what it's saying here in verse 4. 5 says, is not this it in which my Lord drinketh? Because they're going to find out something real quick like, is not this it in which my Lord drinketh? And evidently they're going to get the sack down off of the beasts of burden, the sack that belongs to the younger brother. And notice what it says, and whereby indeed he divineth. As I was saying a moment ago, this divineth cup, it's rather interesting. This was to impress them that Joseph was an Egyptian. In other words, they didn't want it known that Joseph was an Israelite from the land of Canaan, one of them. So he put his Egyptian cup, known as the cup with which he divineth. Divining cups were used among the Egyptians as well as other nations. They bore certain magical inscriptions, and when used, were filled with pure water. And in some cases, melted wax was poured into the cup, and the will of the gods was interpreted by the various shaped figures formed in this way. A mystical form of religion. You know, some people read tea leaves, others the palm, but in Egypt they had the divining cup, and Joseph evidently had a divining cup, and his divining cup was put in the sack of the younger brother. Notice the latter part of verse 5, ye have done evil in so doing. In other words, the man who overtook the small caravan on its way out of the city is accusing these people, these Canaanites or these Israelites from the land of Canaan. He's accusing them of doing evil. That's what it says in verse 5. Now we move to verse 6. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them these same words. Just what I've been saying is what he said unto them. He overtook them. Evidently he stopped them. He said, hey, what have you been doing? We treated you royally back at my master's house. Now you've done something wrong. Let's take your sacks down off of the beasts of burden. We want to see what you got in those sacks. Insinuating that they had stolen something. Verse 7, and they said unto him, wherefore saith my Lord these words? Why do you say this? Why are you accusing us? God forbid that thy servant should do according to this thing. We haven't done anything wrong. God forbid. We wouldn't do anything like this. Verse 8, behold, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths, we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. In other words, he's reiterating what happened the first time. The first time they put the money in the sacks' mouths, so he brought it back on this second journey. Now they're leaving on their second journey, and they're accused of stealing all over again. So this one is trying to square things away. He says, the money which we found in our sacks' mouths we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of thy Lord's house silver or gold? Who would accuse us of stealing the silverware and the knives and the forks and whatever they used in Egypt in those days? Maybe chopsticks, who knows? But anyhow, whatever they used. Who would accuse us of stealing those things? We haven't stolen anything. That's what he's saying in so many words, verse 9. And whomsoever of thy servants it be found, both let him die. If any of our family have stolen anything, let him be arrested, let him be accused, and let him die. You see, there was a rule in that day, a rule by a man named Hammurabi, a code of ethics in the days of Hammurabi. He instituted a code of ethics that was in vogue, that was in operation long before the Mosaic Law was ever given. And Hammurabi had such rules as one who stole from a palace was to be put to death. You can read that in the library in the Code of Ethics of Hammurabi. And anybody that stole anything out of a palace was to be put to death. Such property was held more sacred than life itself. So evidently, the Israelites from Canaan knew about that code of ethics, and they're saying, well, if any of our group have stolen anything, let him die. That's verse 9, the latter part of verse 9. And we also will be my Lord's bondmen. We'll stand good for anything that's wrong. We're willing to subject ourselves to slavery if anything is wrong. This phrase, we also will be my Lord's bondmen, this shows the absolute confidence that the brethren had in one another. These brothers were agreed that they weren't crooks. They hadn't done anything wrong. They were willing to die for each other if necessary. Verse 10, and he said, now also let it be according to your words. He with whom it is found shall be my servant, and ye shall be blameless. Then they speedily took down every man his sack. They're on their way out of town. And this could evidently be Cairo. This was the capital of Egypt, has been for centuries of time. And I'm injecting this here. It doesn't say Cairo, but they're on their way out of town, out of Cairo, away from Pharaoh's palace, away from Joseph's magnificent house in which he lives. And there early in the morning, they stop the caravan, they unload the sacks, and what's going to happen? Verse 11, they speedily took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. You see, the sacks filled with corn or wheat, and this could have been wheat, didn't necessarily have to be corn, wheat, and those in which the money was put were two different kinds. They had two different kinds, one kind of sack for grain, another kind of sack for valuables. The one contained the grain that was to be taken to their families, and the other held the feed for the animals on the journey. So they had feed that they're going to take back to the family, and they had a common sack that they're going to take or open day by day as they feed the animals. And in the sack that there contains the grain to take back to the family, they had the money. This is where Joseph had the money and this divining cup hidden. Verse 11 says, they speedily took down every man his sack. Verse 12, and he searched, and notice what he did. He's going to make this thing really dramatic. He's not going to, just like that, have it over with. He's going to kind of play it out and give a little suspense to it. Make it like a mystery thriller. So what does he do? Verse 12, he searched and began at the oldest, and left at the youngest. So he started up with the oldest, and he went right down the line till he got down to the youngest. And as he opened these sacks, it's quite interesting. Now notice what it says in verse 12, and left at the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Oh, Benjamin's sack. You see, Joseph is trying to find out, are these brothers really genuine? Because he had had the experience with them back home, down south of Hebron, in that area where Joseph grew up as a little boy. As his brothers were out on the hillside with the sheep and the goats and so forth, Joseph knew how crooked they were and how you couldn't trust them as little boys. Now he's trying to find, since they've grown into manhood, are they different? Are these brothers of mine, are they really genuine? So he's going to stick, or he did, put his divining cup in Benjamin's sack. And verse 13 says, then they rent their clothes. Rent their clothes. Why? They were sick at heart. They were taken back. They couldn't understand. Rending the clothes was a Hebrew custom, not Egyptian. It was a Hebrew custom, a sign of genuine honesty, sincerity, and deep mourning. Throughout the Old and the New Testament, we find cases of people who rent their clothing. Job, you remember, rent his clothing and sat in sackcloth and ashes. Here we have these boys down in Egypt. They rent their clothes and laded every man his ass and returned to the city. So what happened? Well, they found this beautiful divine cup, this cup owned by an emperor, the prime minister of Egypt. This beautiful silver cup. They find it in the sack of one of these Israelites who's on his way up to Canaan. It's a pure case of somebody stole something. Someone has said that possession is 90% of the law, or 90 points of the law, and if you say you've lost something, and you find some fella possessing what you lost, and you'd have to believe that he stole it or he illegally bought it, one way or the other. So Joseph had this cup put in Benjamin's sack. Now the boys have been found, so they're going to be taken back into Cairo, evidently. So they put their sacks back up on the beasts of burden, and the latter part of verse 13 says, and returned to the city. These fellas could have made a break for freedom if they'd wanted to. Wide open spaces, and they could have unloaded their animals, and their animals could have run as fast as anybody else's animals. Maybe they had some weapons with them. I don't know. It doesn't say. They could have made a break for freedom, but they were clear in their conscience that they were innocent. And usually a person who is innocent doesn't run. It's usually the thief who runs or hides. The man who is innocent is willing to stand the trial. He's willing to stand before the magistrate and present his claims and his proof of innocency. And so these boys, this also goes to prove to Joseph that they're innocent, because they're willing to go back into Cairo, as it were, and face Joseph again, even though in Benjamin's sack is the divining cup. So there we have their feigned sham dismissal in verses 1 through 13, and now we move into the explanation to Joseph, and they're going to try to explain this to Joseph. Now, mind you, they are Israelites from Canaan. They've come down to Egypt the second time to buy corn, which could be wheat or any small grain, barley, etc. So now they're going to go back into Joseph's house, and they're going to try to explain this to him. This is in verses 14 through 17. And verse 14 says, and Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house. And you're going to find that Judah is going to become the spokesman for the family. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, for he was yet there. Joseph hadn't left the house, because it was early in the morning when they left, you remember. And Joseph had the steward of his house rush out early in the morning, overtake them, get them to unload the sacks off of the animals, look in the mouths of the sacks, find the divining cup, and then the men decided to go back. So Joseph hasn't, in a sense, in the modern vernacular, he hasn't gone to work yet for the day. He's still home. Notice what it says, the latter part of verse 14. And this is beautiful. This is a fulfillment of prophecy that Joseph made with his brothers when they were just young shepherds on the hillsides down in the land of Canaan, south of Hebron, before Joseph was ever sold into slavery. Notice what it says in the latter part of verse 14. And they fell before him on the ground. They bowed themselves down to the ground. He had prophesied this earlier. Prophesied this in the 37th chapter of the book of Genesis in 5 through 11. Those few verses there, verses 5 through 11. Joseph had prophesied this, and he had told his younger brothers this. He had told them, I had a dream, and this is what happened, and they called him the dreamer, and that was why they tried to get rid of him. Now this prophecy is coming to pass. Coming to pass down there in Egypt, and they fell before him on the ground. 15. And Joseph said unto them, what deed is this that ye have done? What is this that you've done? He's acting innocent. What is this that you have done? The steward here tells me that he was missing the divining cup here in the drawing room of my house. It sits in a prominent place, and he was missing it. And we suspected that somebody took it, because nobody else was in the house who would take a thing like that but you people. And then he tells me that he found it in the sack of this Benjamin. I think that's his name, Benjamin. I think you found it in Benjamin's sack. What is this that you've done? Can't you hear Joseph taking the part of a legal attorney and trying to scare his brothers? Trying to overlord it to them? Giving them a little bit of what he had to go through with when he was living there with them in the days when they were sheep herders. Middle of verse 15. Wot ye not that such a man as I can certainly divine? What Joseph meant by leading his brethren to believe this is not stated. It doesn't say why Joseph approached it from this standpoint. This could have been, as we say down south, quote, a put on, end quote. It could have been a play or a dramatization. It could have been something that he was trying to impress them with. We don't know. Bible doesn't say. But anyhow, we know that he was trying to probe their minds. He evidently was merely playing his part to bring them to complete submission and confession of their guilt, hatred, and envy, to make them merciful and kind one to another, and to find out their true and deepest love for Jacob. He was trying to get right down to the heart of their souls to find out, are my brothers true? Are my brothers changed? Are they different than they used to be years ago when we were just young teenagers running around the hillside down in the land of Canaan, south of Hebron, tending our sheep and our goats? Are they different? Now that they're grown men, can they be trusted? Do they really honor their father? All right, let's see. Verse 16. As I said a few moments ago, Judah is going to become the spokesman of this family, you'll notice. Evidently, he had a good flow of language, he had a sharp mind, and he was able to formulate sentences and propositions and so forth. And evidently, the other members of the family selected him to do that. Verse 16, and Judah said, what shall we say unto my Lord? What are we going to say? What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? What are we going to do to clear this thing up? God has found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's servants, both we and he also with whom the cup is found. We're God's servants. Judah's saying we're not a bunch of thieves. We're not a bunch of thieves following along with a camel train, trying to skin everybody out of what they have, take what doesn't belong to us. We're honest, law-abiding, upright citizens. We're not thieves. We're God's servants. So he's saying here in verse 16, and he said, God forbid that I should do so, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. And as for you, get ye up in peace unto your father. Rather interesting, isn't it? Judah offered no excuse for the cup being in Benjamin's sack, because there it was, plain evidence. He couldn't argue the thing away. There was no way of arguing it, because the evidence was there. The cup was in Benjamin's sack. What could he say under the circumstances? Well, his mind is kind of void. He doesn't know what to say. He offered all to become slaves. Joseph rejected this and wanted Benjamin only. And this is the dearest thing to their heart. You remember earlier, I think it was a couple of lessons ago, Judah said to his aged father, Jacob, he said, we got to go down and buy the corn. And the man down there said, we got to bring the youngest. We got to bring Benjamin, because we don't bring Benjamin, we don't get any corn. And you remember Judah said, I'll stand good for Benjamin. We'll take Benjamin down, and I'll stand good for him. My life will be the bounty or the bond for his security. Now Judah is backed up in the corner. And Joseph rejected this, but he wanted Benjamin for his own. Now Joseph is going to have Benjamin stay down in Egypt, because he's going to have him come down again to get more corn. Because eventually Joseph is going to bring this whole family together, and he's going to reveal himself. And isn't it marvelous how God works in all of these circumstances? God works in a marvelous way. The simplicity of the narrative, the pathetic appeal, the filial affection, the generous devotion to his father and brothers make this plea of Judah one of the greatest examples in history. What Judah is going to say over here in the continuation of our lesson. But let's quickly pick up in verse 17 as we complete this section, explanation that Judah is making to Joseph. It says, verse 17, and he said, God forbid that I should do so, but the man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my servant. Joseph is saying that the only way we can resolve this matter, this fella in whose sack the cup was found, I'll have to keep him as a slave. And that's going to throw a monkey wrench in the whole works. Because these boys aren't going to go back up to Canaan with Benjamin left behind. This is what are they going to tell their old dad when they get up there? When they get back to Canaan and they say, Dad, guess what? We got the corn, we got the wheat, but we had to leave Benjamin. No, Benjamin isn't with us. Why, the old man will die. Now listen to the plea that Judah makes in verses 18 through 34, and he's doing this from a pathetic, from a heartbreaking, from a dramatic point of view to try to sway the mind and the conscience of Joseph to release Benjamin. Here it is, Judah's heartbreaking plea, beginning in verse 18. Then Judah came near unto him. Judah, one of the brothers, the brother of Joseph, came up closer to Joseph and said, O my Lord. In those days you always spoke to a dignitary in that manner. O my Lord, let thy servant, I pray thee, speak a word in my Lord's ear. In other words, Judah is saying, may I have a few words, sir? Would you permit me just to say a few words? And let not thine anger burn against thy servant. Please don't be angry with me. What I'm going to say, I trust that you won't be angry against me, for thou art even as Pharaoh. You are a mighty leader in Egypt. You art even as Pharaoh. Verse 19. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have ye a father or a brother? Judah is reminding Joseph that you asked me on one occasion, do you have a father? Is he alive? Do you have some other brothers? Are they living? That's what verse 19 is saying. Verse 20, and we said unto my Lord, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, a little one, and his brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother, and his father loveth him. He has one child that he loves above every other person, and that child's mother's dead, and this father just worships this child. He's referring to Benjamin. Now Joseph must have had reflections when he lived in that part of the world, and when he was his father's favorite, and when his brothers mistreated him. Joseph must have had some flashbacks, or as we say when we're watching a football game, a repeat or something like that, a replay. He was having these replays of what went on in his mind and his life when he lived there in the land of Canaan as a young lad. Notice what it says there in verse 21. And thou saidst unto thy servants, bring him down unto me, that I may set my eyes upon him. He's reminding Joseph that you said to me, when you come down the next time, bring that young boy. That's what verse 21 says. 22, and we said unto my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father. He can't leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. Why, he can't leave his father. His father's affections are all wrapped up in this lad, and why, if our dad knew that Benjamin was dead, why, our father would just throw up his hands and he would die. He wouldn't have any resistance to live. What a plea. What a dramatic plea he's making to Joseph to try to get Joseph to release Benjamin. Verse 23, and thou saidst unto thy servant, except your younger brother come down with you, ye shall not see my face no more. He's reminding Joseph, you said that if you don't bring the younger brother down, don't come back, no more corn for you. The only way you can have corn if you bring the younger brother, Benjamin. You bring him. Judah is pleading, making an appeal to Joseph to release Benjamin so they can all go back home as a family. Verse 24, and it came to pass when we came up unto thy servant my father, we told him the words of my Lord, and our father said, go again and buy us a little food. This has reference to the second visit, which they are now on according to the study of our lesson at this hour. Verse 26, and we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother be with us, then will we go down, for we may not see the man's face except our youngest brother be with us. Now all this is doing right here, verse 18 through 26 so far. Judah is merely making a plea to Joseph, and he's trying to get to the sensitivity of Joseph's soul to try to get him to melt, as it were. So he'll be willing to say to these boys, all right, you go ahead, take Benjamin. But you see, this drama isn't over yet. Joseph wants to be known to all of his family. And he isn't going to do it at this visit. There's got to be another visit unfold itself. So what he's going to do, you see, if he lets Benjamin go now, they might not come back again. But if he keeps Benjamin here, then they'll be compelled to come back again, and therefore he'll get to see the rest of the family. You see what this is all about, and why Judah is making such a strong appeal to Joseph, such a heartbreaking rendering plea? Notice verse 27. And thy servant my father said unto us, you know that my wife bare me 2 sons, and the one went out from me. Now he's referring to Joseph, young Joseph. My wife bare 2 sons, one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn in pieces, and I saw him not since. Judah is letting it be known to Joseph, and Joseph knows this in a sense, but Judah doesn't know it. And Judah is saying that one of the young sons of my father, wild animals tore him apart. Why, they brought his coat into the house, into the tent one day, and the coat was covered over with blood, and we agreed that a wild animal must have eaten him and tore him limb from limb. That's all in verse 28. Latter part of verse 28, surely he is torn in pieces, and I saw him not since. 29, and if ye take this also from me, if you take young Benjamin from me, and mischief befall him, and something unusual happens to Benjamin, if an accident should overtake him, if he should catch some fever here along the banks of the Nile in this hot climate, and he should die, notice what it says, the latter part of 29. Ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Why, my father would die. My hairs would turn white. The sorrow and the anguish of soul upon me, I would be distraught. There has to be some solution to this problem. Verse 30. Now therefore, when I come to thy servant my father, and the lad be not with us, this lad is Benjamin, 30 years of age, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life. This phrase, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, Joseph could understand this, for he himself had been the loved one of his father before being sold into slavery. You see, Judah is making one of those masterful pleas to get his younger brother released from the prime minister of Egypt, Joseph, unknowingly, who is his brother. Ye shall bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. Verse 30, now therefore when I come to the servant my Lord, and the lad be not with us, seeing that his life is bound up in the lad's life, it shall come to pass, verse 31, when he seeth that the lad is not with us, that he will die. Why, the shock of my younger brother Benjamin not being with us, my old dad will just die. He won't be able to take it. When he seeth that the lad is not with us, he will die, and thy servants shall bring down the gray hairs of thy servant, our father, with sorrow to the grave. And all of we brothers will carry this condemnation to the grave, because we promised our dear old dad before we ever left Canaan. We said, Dad, we'll bring him back. Don't worry. Don't worry, Dad. We'll bring him back. We'll stay down in Egypt as slaves in order that young Benjamin can be freed. But Joseph said, no. You got to leave Benjamin. Watch what it says in verses 32 through 34. For thy servant became surety. Judah described very passionately Jacob's suffering at the loss of Joseph. The loss of Benjamin would no doubt cause his death. So to prevent this, Judah offered himself as a bondman in place of Benjamin. Verse 32. For thy servant became surety for the lad unto my father, saying, if I bring him not unto thee, then I shall bear the blame to my father forever. Now therefore I pray thee. He's summing up his case. The lawyer is standing there in front of the trial jury. He's presented all of the evidence. And what he's going to say in these next few words, these next few phrases, these sentences, is going to lock this case to win it or to lose it. Notice what he says. Now therefore, I pray thee, let thy servant abide instead of the lad, a bondman to my Lord. Judah talking to Joseph, my Lord, let me remain as surety, as a bondman or a slave. Let me stay here for security purposes, and you free the young lad. Let him go back to his dad, to our father. Verse 34. For how shall I go up to my father, and the lad not be with me? How can I possibly go back to Canaan? And my younger brother not be with me? How can I do that? That's verse 34. How shall I go up to my father, and the lad not be with me, lest peradventure I see the evil that shall come on my father? Why, if I leave my younger brother down here in Egypt, and I go back up to Canaan, and I face my aging father, and I say, Dad, we've got the corn, we got the wheat, we got the barley. Dad, we got some tremendous experiences to share with you and relate to you. But Dad, I'm sorry. That man down in Egypt, you know what he did? He made me leave Benjamin down there, and I pled with him. I offered myself as a slave to stay down there to be security for him. I offered myself as a bond if he would let me stay and let Benjamin come back, but he wouldn't do it. And Judah's making all of this plea to his brother Joseph, and Judah doesn't know that man in charge of Pharaoh's household is his brother Joseph. Isn't that amazing? Can't you see the hand of God in all of this? God works in mysterious ways, His miracles and His plan to perform and to unfold for God's honor and God's glory and for your good. And you know, sometimes we get in betwixt and between, and we say we're backed up in a corner, or we don't know which way to turn. But you know, God brings all of this around for God's honor and God's glory and for our good. And all we have to do is to be patient and allow the plan of God to carefully unfold. And it will unfold in its time, according to God's plan, and God will get the glory, and God will get the honor, and it will be for our benefit.
On the other side of the cassette, you will hear the next message in Dr. Estep's verse-by-verse study of the book of Genesis.